Hey everybody, welcome back to another very exciting Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. I am your host, Jesús Ramirez. How's it going? Thank you so much for joining me. In today's episode, we're gonna continue working with the hands-on tutorials inside of Photoshop. Let me know in the chat where you're streaming from. I'm streaming from the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area in San Ramon, California. A lot of familiar faces in the chat already. Good to see you, Frank, Ted, General Kenobi. Thank you so much for joining me. Why don't we switch over into my screen now, and I can show you guys what we're going to discuss today. So this is going to be the final product. Just like every other tutorial in this set of tutorials this week, they can be found inside of Photoshop. So if you click on the Discover panel icon, this magnifying glass here, you'll open up the Discover panel. From the Discover panel, it should open up on the home page, and you need to scroll down to the hands-on tutorial section. From here, you can scroll down and go to Add Photo Effects. And look at that. The little thumbnail is the same project we're going to work on today. And the very first one is Create Light Rays with a Gradient Fill. So that's what we're going to work on today. And what happens here is when you click on this icon, you'll see the final product, and you can click on Start Tutorials. These are tutorials I created that are inside of Photoshop, and all you need to do is click on Start Tutorial, and Photoshop will automatically download the image to your installation of Photoshop here, and then you'll see these blue on-screen overlays that tell you step-by-step what to do. So if there's something that you miss in the stream, you can always come back and follow the on-screen overlays. And this is obviously how you get the file. Another way of getting to the file is by going into, let me just close this, is by going into behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. Make sure that you follow the challenge and check out the community chat on Discord. But you should see the dual lighting effect. Actually, that's not the one we're working on. That was the one from Monday. You'll see that add light rays box and click on Get Started, and that will also get you into that should also get you the file. Awesome. We're going to cover a lot more than what the tutorial here shows, but the tutorial will show you the basic steps in Photoshop, and of course I'm going to add a lot more tips and tricks that I'm sure you'll love. So let's get right into it, since we have a lot to cover today. So this is going to be the final product, and I'm just going to put it into a group and hide it just so that we can work with this image. The image that you use really doesn't matter, but it's always a good idea to have an image where light rays will be peeking through. That could be trees, that could be maybe buildings or something. As long as light rays will go through, that would be a good choice, maybe a window. But let's get right into it. So the first step that you want to do is create a new gradient layer or solid fill layer. And there you go. Then you can select angle, and it goes around like this, and you can click and drag and move it. The color at this point really doesn't matter, because we're going to add something that we often don't see, which is noise. And you can actually get to it by double clicking on the gradient here. If you double click on it, this window comes up, and from this window we can select the noise option. Notice when we get this noise option, we get this really cool effect. See that? And I mean, you might be happy with this if you want, and you can click and drag it and place it wherever you want, and then you can set the blending mode to screen, and you have something that looks like that. But in this case, we're not going to use this option. There's going to be a few more settings that we need to adjust to get the result that we want. So I'm going to double click on the layer thumbnail again to bring up the gradient fill. I'll click on the gradient to bring up the gradient editor. Now, after you set the gradient to noise, you're going to get something that looks like that. And then under color mode, we're on RGB. So if you adjust the RGB, you can obviously see that you change the colors of the gradient. But instead, we're going to move into the hue, saturation, and brightness. And watch what happens when you bring the saturation down. See that? See? When you bring the saturation down, you just get black and white on your image. This is the result that we want. And oh, great. I see my good friend Anna McNaught in the chat. Good to see you, Anna. We were just talking about you yesterday on the stream we did together last time. I shared a link. I hope you guys got to see it. But Anna and I worked on a really cool project last time we streamed together. But anyway, you can bring the saturation down, and this gets you this effect that you see here. If you see a sharp line like this line here, you can just click on the randomize button until it kind of goes away. Like now, you can no longer see the line. The line is pretty much gone. So that's what I want. I just don't want to see that line. And I can press OK. And now I can place this anywhere I want. So I can place this maybe on the top right corner or on the top left. By the way, I got to talk about Overscroll in a moment, just in case your computer's not set up for Overscroll, or Photoshop, I should say. But the point is that you can place this anywhere you want. So maybe I can place this right about here, and I'll press OK. Now, side note, we'll discuss Overscroll. Now, we talked about it yesterday, I believe, but I like to set my Photoshop in the Overscroll mode, which is not on by default. And that just means that I can move my canvas outside of the viewing port here. I can just move it anywhere I want. If you press Control-K, Command-K on the Mac, that will bring up the Preferences panel. And from the Tools tab, make sure that you enable Overscroll. I'll disable it, and I'll show you what that does. When it's disabled, if I hold the spacebar and pan, it won't allow me to pan if I'm viewing the entire image. I can obviously pan if I'm inside the zoomed into the image, but if I'm zoomed out and I want to pan, I can't pan, and I don't like that. I like to have the flexibility of moving my canvas around. So I like to press Control-K on Windows, Command-K on the Mac, and under the Tools tab, I like to enable Overscroll. So you might want to enable that, and that just gives you the flexibility to move your canvas around anywhere that you like. And it reminds me of, I used to do a lot of drawings when I was a kid, so it reminds me of just moving the paper all around the table. So I just like that flexibility. So make sure that you enable that. Awesome. Cool. So the next thing, a new habit that I have is deleting layer masks if I don't need them, just so that I know that it's not controlling anything. So I'm going to delete it. You don't have to. And what I'm going to do now is colorize the light rays. And to do so, I'm going to go into the hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below. Again, I'll delete the layer mask because it's not controlling anything. By the way, you can clip a layer by holding Control-Alt-G on Windows, Command-Option-G on the Mac, or clicking on this icon. And what that does is it creates this clipping mask. You can see that this layer has a down pointing arrow to the left of it. That is just indicating that this layer is only controlling the layer directly below it, in this case, the gradient fill. So if I make an adjustment, in this case, it's not going to show because the pixels are too bright, but if I make the pixels darker and then make an adjustment, we should be able to see the color. I needed to check colorize, by the way. So now we can select the color. If I didn't have this clipping mask, then that adjustment layer will affect everything below it, including the background, and that is not what we want. We want to make sure that we only affect the gradient fill. So click on this icon or press Control-Alt-G on Windows, Command-Option-G on the Mac to create the clipping mask. Now I can select the color that I want. By enabling Colorize, I'm just telling Photoshop to make the pixels of the gradient layer the color that I select in this hue slider. So notice that if I set it here right on yellow, the bar here turns yellow. So this is the color that we're making. In other words, these are the original colors on top, and the colors below are the colors that it's going to change to. Since we enabled Colorize, it's going to change all the colors to the color that we select. See that? This is what this is indicating. So I can just select the color that I think would work in this case. Since we're trying to recreate the illusion of sunlight or sun rays coming through, then I'll maybe set it to yellow, move it up a bit, and maybe reduce the saturation a little bit. And instead of reducing the opacity to make it less intense, what I'll do instead is create a levels adjustment layer below the hue and saturation adjustment layer. Again, I'll delete the layer mask. If you create a new layer in between the layer that you're on and a clip layer, the layer that you create will also be clipped, and that's what we want. And what I'm going to do is use these sliders here to control the brightness of the image. And if I disable the background, you can really see what I'm doing. I'm just making some pixels brighter, others darker, as you can see here, and you can just adjust it accordingly. In this case, I'm not really that happy actually, because these pixels are not as bright as the ones on the right. I can always come into my gradient fill once again and just click on randomize a few more times until I get something that's more even. I think this is probably more even, it will work better. So I'll use that. but then I can come in here on the levels adjustment and then just give it more contrast. And then I can enable the background and see how that looks and just adjust it accordingly. And then I can double click on the gradient once again to bring up the gradient fill window and drag this around and place it wherever I think would look best. So this is one method of adding light rays in your images. I'm going to show you a different method, since this method is a little too short for a 25 minutes stream. So we'll definitely, I'll definitely show you another method of doing this. Is the dark side stronger? I think this is probably an old question, General Kenobi. So yeah, the right side, oh, I guess it's still darker side on, it's still dark on the right side at the moment. If it keeps happening, just, you know, keep randomizing it until you get something that looks good to your eye. You know, maybe that's probably better, but then I probably will have to make everything darker just so that it's not so strong. So you do have to play around with it. Also, something else you might want to do is add a layer mask if something is too strong and paint with black. With a layer mask, black hides and white reveals. So maybe you paint away some of that, up to you. And here's the trick with a layer mask. You can also bring down the density, which is almost like the opacity slider in a way. And you can see the layer thumbnail here. Notice how it's I'll even show you. Notice how it's black. This is what I painted. This is what's being hidden. But if I bring down the density, it's no longer black. It's now a shade of gray. Obviously, bringing it back all the way to white will reveal everything in that layer. And bringing it back to 100% will show you the black areas that I painted. So you can use this to fine tune how dark or how bright your mask is. By holding Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and clicking on the layer thumbnail, you can see the actual image and not the mask. And you can just adjust it accordingly if you need to, or not. Totally up to you on how you use this effect. But I'll put these into a group, and I'm going to show you now a second method of adding light rays in Photoshop. I'll look at the chat and see if there's any questions. Awesome. Good to see you, Sean. We need more lens flare. You know what? I wasn't planning on showing a lens flare, anything with lens flare, but here's the trick for lens flares. If you create a new layer with lens flares, obviously you need to fill a layer, right? So we'll fill it with black. And if you go into filter, render, and select lens flare, this is the lens flare here, right? And you can click and drag and place it wherever you like. And then when you press OK, you can change the blending mode to screen, right? So like that's a good way of adding a lens flare. But here's two tricks on showing you exactly how to place a lens flare. So you notice that we didn't have a preview, right, when we went into the lens flare. But if you apply the lens flare to the background layer, you can actually see the preview and you can see how it's going to affect your image. The problem is that if you do this, let me choose a different one. I'll choose that one. The problem is that if you do this, then you work destructively, right? Well, once you apply a lens flare, you can just enable the black layer and then just reapply it again, and it'll apply it in the same spot, and you can change the blending mode to screen. That's one way. Now, if you want to be super, super, super precise, what you can do is go into the info panel and notice that when I hover over the canvas, and you guys are going to have to help me here because I'm not going to remember. So notice on the X and Y values right here, notice the X and Y values. So if I go, we'll select a different spot. We'll just select that hole right there. And notice the X value is 917 and 86 in the Y. You guys see that? 917 and 86 right here. I'm probably not going to get the same values anymore, but 918 and 86. Somebody write that in the chat so that I don't forget. But anyway, 918 and 86 are the X and Y coordinates. So now if I go into the, I'm going to remove that lens flare. Now, if I go into the lens flare, render lens flare, you can hold Alt on Windows, Option in the Mac, and click on the preview window. You'll get this precise flare center. So what was it? 917 and 86. Thank you for writing that down, or 918. It doesn't matter. 86. You'll see that you enter those coordinates. once you enter those coordinates and press OK, Photoshop will move the lens flare right on that specific pixel. So you can get a pixel perfect lens flare wherever you want it. And then I can press OK, and now it appears right there. So those are 2 tricks on how to get the lens flare specifically in the spot that you want it. So I hope that that was beneficial for you guys if you want to apply precise lens flares. And thank you so much, everybody. Tim, Matthew, Sean, Enlighten, Paco, for putting the values there, because I always forget. So thank you so much. Anyway, so we're going to get back to doing the other method of creating light rays. Again, there's so many ways of doing it. Another way would be to create just a black layer. By the way, I created a new a black layer here just by pressing Control and Backspace, since that's my background color. You can see my background color here. So Control Backspace on Windows, Command Delete on the Mac fills with the background color. Foreground color is Alt and Backspace, or Option Delete on the Mac. And of course, if you have them the other way around, then you'll have to fill with the foreground color. It really depends on what you have. And if you have different colors, like maybe red and I don't know, blue or something, and you want to get to black and white quickly, just press the D key on the keyboard for the default black and white colors and just fill with black. The point is you need a black layer. What I'm going to do now is create a circle like so, something like this, and just place it right in the center. And I didn't feather the edges. I need soft edges. And the reason that I don't like to use the feather command is because I don't really know what it looks like. You know, I could set like 10 pixels, but what does that look like? I don't know. So what I like to do instead is press the Q key on the keyboard to enter the quick mask mode. And from here, I can now feather the selection by going into Gaussian blur. So now I can actually see what that looks like. Now I can actually see what 10 pixels feather looks like. I can see what 20 pixel feather looks like. So I can keep making these adjustments until I get something that looks like this. When I press OK and press the Q key once again, it'll look the same. But when I fill, you'll notice that it fills in a soft circle. And that's what I want. Doing the feather command will do the same thing here. I'll show you. I'll create a new layer just to delete it easily. So if I just create a circle and fill, notice that I have a hard edge. I can change the feather to like 10, but I don't know what that looks like. So I need to create the circle and then fill, and now I know what that looks like. So that's why I don't like using the feather technique, just because I don't know what it looks like. So I'd rather take the extra step and press the Q key on the keyboard with the selection active, which gets me into the quick mask mode, and I can actually see the selection, and I can also treat it almost like any other layer, right? Because I can come in here, and with white I could paint, and with black I could take away. So white adds, white reveals, and black conceals. I could also apply a filter, as you just saw. So I can apply all kinds of other filters, but I won't take the time to do that. You saw that I could apply a filter. But the point is then when you're done, that is your selection. So I think it's much more flexible, and it gives you a lot more options to work that way. Cool. What I'm going to do now is, oops, sorry, I accidentally went back too far. Instead of pressing undo so many times, what I should really do is go into the history panel and go into this state here, I think. Let's see. There we go. That's where I wanted to go. Oh, here we go. Exit quick mask mode. That's where I wanted to go. So instead of filling with white, that's not really what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a black and white foreground and background color. And what I really wanted to do was go into filter, render, and add clouds to create that effect. By the way, here's another trick. The Alt key is your friend, or the Option key on the Mac. If you go into filter and then hold the Alt key and then go into the clouds menu again, you'll get clouds with more contrast. So basically the same thing, but the clouds have more contrast, as you saw there. So the regular one looks like this, soft. And if you hold Alt or Option and go into the render menu in clouds, it looks like that. So we'll keep the ones with more contrast. And what I'm going to do now is press Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to deselect, and we're going to go into filter, blur, and we're gonna do radio blur. And the radio blur has two options. It has this spin zoom, and I'll press OK, and that's what that spin zoom does. You can create that swirly effect, but that's not what we want. Instead, what we want to do, and by the way, if you go into the first option, is the last filter that you applied, but it just reapplies it again. But if you just hold the Alt key or the Option key, it brings up the menu. So that's what we want to do. But what I want to do in this case is go into the zoom option, and I can set the amount all the way to 100. If I were to just press OK now, it'll just apply this zoom that looks like that, and that may look okay, but that's not what I want. What I want to do instead is move this to the top right, like so, and press OK, and I get that result that you see there. Now I can go into Image, Levels, and again, I can adjust the contrast to get something that looks more like light rays. I can press OK, and now I can change the blending mode to screen, and I can move this wherever I want. I can place that there, for example, and I can use the same technique to add color. I can go into the hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, select colorize, and select a color for my sun rays. Another advantage of doing this technique with the black layer like so is that we can now turn this into a brush. So I'll press Control I on Windows, Command I on the Mac. White will become invisible and black will become the quote unquote paint. So I can go into Edit and select Define Brush Preset, and I can call this light rays, or light rays. It's only one, or I don't know, I guess it's multiple. Who knows? The point is that you can give it whatever name you want, press OK, and there's my brush right there. So now when I create a new brush, and let me unclip it. If I create a new layer, I can now paint. See that? And I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to adjust my brush size. Obviously, in this case, I would want it to be white or yellow or something like that. So with this background layer enabled, I can now come in here and create a new layer on top and maybe add a few light rays like so, because there's more than one coming through. See that? So I can just choose how these light rays are going to affect my image, and they're all coming from the same way. But maybe I want the light rays to come from the other side. How do I do that? Well, you can click on this icon here to bring up the brush settings, and I can just flip, and I'll increase the spacing so you can see what they look like. These are my little brushes here. I can flip it on the x-axis, and now they're facing the other way. So now I can do the same thing, but on the other side. Maybe I'll create a really, really big one here. I don't know, something like that. And then I can go into the hue and saturation adjustment layer, clip it to the layer below, hit colorize. In this case, I'm just going to bring down the lightness a little bit and select a color that might fit this particular scene. Now, if you want it to be like really realistic, what I would do instead is probably create multiple brushes that look a little different so that they all don't look the same, and maybe reapply the blur filter so that the light rays get longer. But you know, you can do that on your own time. It's a little too much for a short stream. And yeah, let me see if there's any questions in the chat. Ted said, Jesus is a tip a minute. Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. Cool. Yeah, these are all recorded and you can definitely watch them. I know that I was probably going a little too fast, but I just like showing as many tips as possible in the short amount of time that we have, since I know that they're all recorded and you're probably going to watch them anyway. Cool. Yeah, it looks like there's no questions in the chat. Awesome. I would like to remind everybody to please go and check out the hands-on tutorials in the Discover panel. Again, click on the Discover panel icon, this little magnifying glass. Go to hands-on tutorials, then go to add photo effects. Most of the tutorials in this category are mine, except for the last two, but still check them out. I'm sure they're great tutorials. So yeah, check them out. Scat Valentine, a friend of mine, created this one. Awesome. But yeah, make sure that you check them out. Also, make sure that you check out Behance let me bring that up. Go into behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. Make sure that you check out the community tab on Discord, and you can watch the old Photoshop Daily Creative Challenges, and of course, download the assets that we're working with. I would love to see your work, so make sure that you go into Behance and share it. I would love to see what creative ideas you get with this lighting effect technique or light rate technique. Anyway, everybody, I'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me. It was great being here, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. Thanks, everybody. See you. Bye.